Hey guys, John the Con here, and welcome to my Getting Started with Warhammer video series. In this episode, we'll be going over the tools that you're going to need in order to start your journey. So without further ado, let's get started. So first you want to start off with a good pair of wire cutters or nippers. Now I got these on Amazon, however you could also find them at your local hobby store or at your hardware store. In the hardware store you should be able to find these in the electrical side, since these are wire cutters, and the sharper that you could get them, the better. Reason being is that you're going to be cutting into mold injected plastics, and what you want to do is to get as close as possible to the actual model itself without cutting into the model, and you want to do it as cleanly as possible. Now, to follow up from this, you're going to want to have a sharp pair of hobby knives. Reason being is that after you have cut off all your pieces and you have built your model, you're going to have imperfections like this from the mold itself, and you're gonna need to actually scrape these off. Okay, so once you scrape these off, you're gonna have that smooth finish, and you're gonna be able to have a little bit more realism when it comes down to your painting. Now, to help you even further with those actual mold lines is filers. So you're going to need actually a little sanding paper or filers themselves. So once you actually start taking off all those mold lines and little leftover pieces, you could actually go in there and start filing those down to a smooth finish. Now, in order to actually get to here, you're going to need a good glue, or you're going to need a basically cement, right? So I use this that gets into the cracks. So this is actually for plastics, and what this does is when you use it, it's a little brush, so it's a brush on, and it gets into the cracks of the actual model themselves. But instead of gluing, this actually fuses the plastics together. So this S is for very slim surfaces, or very fine surfaces. So this is actually very runny, and this one is a little thicker for bigger models, and it's actually a bigger brush. And as you can see here, it's just a little bit thicker. The other one's a lot runnier, just because you want it to get into the actual cracks, and you're able to actually basically squeeze them into each other, and it actually fuses the plastics. Okay, so these are these, or you could use some actual super glue. Now, there are two kinds of super glue. You have this one, which is the regular super glue you can get at any hobby store or the actual hardware store. And this one's actually very runny, so you have to be very careful with it. Now, if you don't feel like you're too comfortable with using a little bit of runny glue, and you're afraid that it might get all over your model itself, then you could actually go ahead and use a super glue gel. And actually, this is wonderful because it gives you a little bit of a tacky area around the actual place where you put it on, for you to just stick it on there, and you don't have to worry about actually it running anywhere. And lastly, what you're gonna need is some paintbrushes. Now, this is just your regular run-of-the-mill paintbrushes that you could get at your hobby store. Just make sure that when you're picking them out, you could get ones that have a little bit finer tips at the end. Now, these are ultimate beginner brushes, But once you start getting better, you're going to have a set of different brushes that you're going to use for different situations. Normally, once you start stepping up, you're going to get Kolinsky, which is sable hair brushes, where you're going to be able to retain a good amount of paint. And they also have synthetic brushes where you could use for little things like inks and things like that. But for starting purposes, you could definitely go ahead and just start off with a simple set of artist brushes. And I'll show you in later videos how to basically paint with them cleanly. So for reference, it's going to be your cutters. You're going to need a good set of hobby knives. You're going to need your sandpaper and or files. And then from there, you're going to need your glues or a glue, and or if you want to use actual plastic cement glues. And lastly, and not least, your starter brushes. With the tools I just showed you, you're going to be able to go from this to this. And in our next video, we're going to be able to go over painting and what you're going to need in order to get started to paint your actual models themselves. So from there, you'll be able to go from here to the finished product of this. So thank you so much for joining me in this episode of getting started with Warhammer and the tools you're going to need. Until next time, goodbye.